Hi, okay, I'm at Animal Care Expo and I don't feel the best right now, but I promised myself that I would brain dump after every single day so that everything is like fresh in my mind. So today was the learning lab day. We had obviously like multiple things that were going on. The one that I decided to attend was Barkitecture, basically architecture for dog facilities, but they also talked a little bit about cat and even small animal like rabbit and guinea pigs. So anyways, I got a lot of really good information on this. So today was a full day of just this. There was a welcome ceremony after this learning lab, but it was just a keynote speaker and it was really more of like a mental thing, like uplifting. It was very funny. So anyways, today my brain dump is just going to be from Barkitecture, but it was a lot of information, a lot of really good information and stuff that I didn't really know previously. We are hoping to build sanctuary build / rescue soon. So I think I got a lot of really good information and I feel a lot more prepared for it. Okay, so starting off, the first thing that they mentioned to us is you might be able to afford the build because you get a price up front. But what a lot of people don't think about is the maintenance that comes with it. So one of the speakers, she is actually a nonprofit leader, and she went, I think she said, from a 1,500 square foot building to a 40,000 square foot building. So obviously that is a huge jump. And she said like the 1,500 square foot building really didn't cost anything to run. But now obviously this 40,000 square foot facility is like a massive leap. So maintenance is something that she really had to think about. She also had to hire 2 full-time maintenance employees just because, you want to make sure that everything stays clean and usable and, things don't just start breaking down on you. So definitely makes sense. But she was like, the number one thing that people don't think about is what it's going to cost to upkeep this new space. So don't forget about that. Another thing that they brought to our attention is having 2 architectures, which, obviously is a little bit more costly, but it can't be understated. Having somebody local who really knows your area and kind of what it takes to have a successful and smarter building in your area. But then you also kind of need an animal specialist architect, because not just dogs, any animal needs something very, very specific. And especially right now, I feel like diseases are just like out of control. There's certain shelters that we work with, and I kind of wish that they would maybe get a new building and they would really focus on HVAC and preventing disease because like the outbreaks are just like weekly at this point. Anyways, having somebody who understands animal rescue, animals in general, and what it takes to keep them safe, that really goes a long way. So if you can afford it, having both is ideal. Next, naming opportunities and then having different levels. So apparently people like to put their names on stuff. Typically people do like bricks where you can put your name or your logo on bricks or whatever. But a lot of them were saying that they do everything. Allow people to name whatever you want. Allow them to name your lobby, allow them to name every kennel. Somebody said that they allowed naming for the bathroom. A company bought a plaque to put on the bathroom, whatever floats your boat, but also make sure that you have a lot of different levels because, sometimes there's people who want to do it like in memory of their own pet. And so in that case, probably just like $100 is the most that you could charge. But then there's also some businesses who want the publicity from it. And so for them, you can charge like $10,000. It just kind of depends on your community and kind of the financial situation that people are in. Next is documenting everything. I feel like this one goes without saying, just because obviously we document everything here at the rescue. But they did say that like not only is it good for transparency purposes, so people know where their money's going, but it's also really good for community building. And people on the internet love seeing stuff happen like from the ground up and to really feel like you're part of the process. Documenting everything is a really good way to build up your community, gain followers, potentially monetize your social media if it's not already. Like when you get the aerial views, you usually get them like at different mile markers throughout the build, and so make sure that you're getting those and you're posting those because those are really good content to show like here's where we were 6 months ago, here's where we are now, and then here's the final product. So anyways, good content. Another thing is really honing in on who your community is. This is something that I don't think I necessarily thought about in the way that they explained. So, some people are very small, like boots on the ground, tight-knit community. And so in that sense, like, yeah, your city or your town is kind of your community. But there's some people like our organization, I would say that we are more regional. We're not really city or state based. As you guys know, we pull dogs from Texas, California, and New Mexico. So we aren't just serving one single community, we are servicing multiple communities. Same thing for our pet food pantry. I know I haven't really publicized it here, but on my personal page, I've talked about it quite a bit. We've been providing food to other organizations, other rescues. So right there again, like it's not just one single city, not one single state, like we're kind of operating a little bit more regionally. So anyways, we have to now think about our community as a regional community and not just like our city. Okay, moving on to priority services. This is another one that I don't think I fully thought out, or maybe I just haven't put the energy into it, I guess I should say, but they really said when you build a new building, or you're going into a new venture, like whether it's remodeling or whatever it may be, really make sure that you are targeting your top 3 program services, whatever you want to offer. So a lot of times people are thinking like so far into the future, like, well, these are what we're doing right now, but then this is what I want to do, and I want to make sure that we have the space to offer that in the future, like once we have more money to throw at this project. And so really sitting down and just going through like, what do we need right now, right this second? Obviously we can think about the other things and make sure that we are at least planning for them, but what do we need to act on right now? And so for my list, I put empathy for animals, just because that's like the biggest one for us. We want to make sure that we have a space where we can have kids come in and they can do our program, and we don't have to do it online, or like we have to go to them or whatever. We just want one site where our dogs are and they can come in and they can do it. So that's number 1. Number 2, pet food pantry. I know I just kind of mentioned it right now, but making sure that we have storage for the pet food pantry, but then we also have some sort of system in place for that. And then lastly is adoptions. That one's kind of obvious. But then for my future list, I would love to eventually have vetting. And so making sure, again, not that we're necessarily going to build it right now, but at least that we have a plan for if in the future we do have the funding for it, how can we make vetting happen? Okay, getting into a little bit more of like the build itself. So number 1, make sure to consider cross-contamination. I kind of mentioned this previously, but diseases are spreading like so rapidly, and I feel like it's really difficult to mitigate it once it's already happened. So if you can have HVAC systems really strictly in place, you really need to make sure that you can do that. We don't want the same vents used for the sick animals and the healthy animals, or even just the quarantine if they're doing like their 2-week isolation period. We want to make sure that they are not cross-contaminated at all. Next one, I guess technically it's a little bit more of like a fun thing, and they did warn us about creating a space specifically for this, but I do think it's a good idea just because of how active we are on social media. But to have a photo room, a room where like the lighting is like really, really good, you have like a blank backdrop, you can have like photo equipment and stuff in there, but just a room where you can get really quality photos and videos of the dogs that you can use on the website or whatever for posting adoptable dogs. So I love that idea, and I'll come back to that in a second. The next one, crisis holding services. So I personally have never heard of this before. This was a first for me, but essentially it is an area that you set aside specifically for crisis, and that's not for our crisis, but somebody else's crisis. So they use the example of like a domestic violence situation. So, you know, if somebody is trying to escape a situation, they can come and they can bring their dog to us. Essentially we will care for the dog and everything that's needed, allow them to get back on their feet, and then once they're able to, they can come and reclaim their dog. So basically keeping families together. So just having that room or rooms where somebody can, even though they're not living at the shelter or the rescue, they can come in whenever they want and like be with their dog and just spend some time. And then, like I said, once they get back on their feet, then they can finally be reunited. So just a little extra thing. It's basically like boarding, but like community service, I guess. All right, up next, do a bubble diagram. So basically, the idea here is knowing exactly what needs to be next to each other in the floor plan. So let's just say, for example, you have a vet room. You need to make sure that the kennels are near the vet room because that would only make sense. So if you have, you know, the vet room and then the lobby and then offices and then the kennels, like that's now we're going to have to travel through all of that. And again, you're worried about like cross-contamination and disease and all of that. So you really want to make sure that where you're placing everything makes sense. Same with like storage. If you're going to have food and laundry and whatever here, you probably want to make sure that the kennels are somewhat close so that you're not having to carry big giant bags of dog food all the way over here. So anyways, just making sure that you're doing a smart floor plan. Obviously the architect will walk you through all of that, and that's something that they should be thinking about. But again, that's kind of why we want to have an animal specialist architect, because they know kind of what needs to go next to each other. Whereas if you just have a local person, they probably aren't going to know very much about animals or their needs or anything like that. So just making sure that you are at least aware of that and planning for it yourself as well. Okay, flex spaces. So this kind of ties back to what I was talking about with like the photo room. So having one, doesn't have to be giant, but a larger open room that you can use for whatever you need. You know, in some cases that might mean having a giant room so that we can do empathy for animals. And on other days that might mean, you know, having a board meeting in there. On other days, maybe taking out all of the tables and chairs and doing training in there. Or if we ever get over capacity, to be able to throw some crates in there, and now it's extra space for that. Another thing that they mentioned when it comes to flex spaces is making sure that you understand what your needs are and like who it is that you're serving. So obviously if you're going to be co-housing dogs, that's one situation that you need to be aware of, because obviously that means you're probably going to need a little bit more space than the minimum 5x10. If you're going to have senior dogs, obviously we probably want to have senior dogs separated from the younger ones who are going to trample that dog. If you're going to take in medical or behavioral, again, that's another thing you have to consider just as far as space and like if they're going to be around other dogs. Same with like moms and babies. And I guess kind of all of this ties back to disease control. Once again, that was like the number one reoccurring theme throughout this. So making sure that we have the proper disease control in place. And that's not just necessarily for the HVAC system, like obviously yes, that's a huge part of it, but then also making sure that you have protocols in place that you can follow. You know, circulation is the number one disease spreader, but you know, it's also not having like documented cleaning protocols in place. So anyways, that's another thing that you should really consider when doing these floor plans. Also think about like the practicality and what it is that you need to do to keep all of your dogs safe. Obviously we don't take in cats, but fun fact that I just learned today, I don't know, maybe it's like common knowledge, but I had no idea about this. Cats do not like being on floor level. I did not know that. That is news to me. Yeah, apparently a lot of people prefer to have like their cat level, like on the second floor, or if you don't have multiple floors, to put them like in raised kennels so that they sit a little bit higher. Anyways, like I said, I'm not a cat person, so I did not know that, but you learn something new every day. For dogs, 5x10 is the smallest that you should ever do for a kennel, if it's fully indoor. If you're gonna do indoor-outdoor, it needs to be a little bit bigger, so 5x12. Just because if you close the door, then you're closing off a part of this measurement. I thought this was interesting because in all of the research that I did, I landed on the number either 8x10 or 10x10. So that's obviously much, much larger than these sizes, which could be good or bad, but anyways, it's something that I now know that I need to look into a little bit further. When it comes to materials, I don't want to get into this too much because the one thing that they did say is pricing varies based on your area. Like there's some things that are very common in your area, which will probably be cheaper. But anyways, as a general rule of thumb, for floors, they said resinous is best. It is the more expensive option, so if you need a cheaper option, epoxy works as well. Resinous stands the test of time much, much better. So if you can invest in resinous over epoxy, definitely do it. But epoxy is not bad by any means. Moving on to walls, they said glaze was the best, but in a lot of areas it's very tough to get. So I don't know, I haven't looked into that, but the alternative is resinous. The third option would be epoxy paint. Again, those are in order of cost too. Also for walls, make sure to get corner guards because dogs love to take the walls out. For doors, so I don't know, I just wrote down hollow metal doors because they can be painted and they're the most cost effective. But she did say if you're in an area where there's going to be a lot of moisture in the air, like because you're spraying down the kennels or whatever the reason may be, if it's an area that gets a lot of moisture, then you probably don't want these just because they're gonna rust. But anyways, they can be painted, so I figure we can make it look pretty. Next, counters. So if you're gonna have just like a dry counter, just something like a break room or whatever, you can use plastic laminate. But if it's going to be wet, like something that you're gonna have to clean often, like for vet exam rooms, like you're going to be placing dogs on there quite often, then you want to go with stainless steel. Also, this makes sense, but I do not do it. You should always be using commercial grade products and not residential. Yeah, I mean, we're a very small rescue and we do a lot of laundry, so I can see why that is. But yeah, always use commercial. Alrighty, and then so the end of the talk was a whole lot of information about like behavior and how the setup, I mean, obviously it can either create behavior problems or it can lead to quiet and calm. So number one is the lighting. So with dog housing, all of the lights should be between 50 to 60 FC, but also make sure that it's dimmable. It should only be brought up to 50 to 60, like while they're eating and then while you're cleaning their space. All the other times you can dim it, obviously when they're going to bed at night, turn the lights off, or if you just want them to kind of calm down throughout the day, then you can turn it down. But anyways, when you're cleaning, it should definitely be between 50 to 60. The rest of the facility can be down at 30 FC. There's no reason for it to be super bright. Obviously, daylight is much, much better than artificial light. So they said for your lobby and your dog spaces, try to keep them on the outer perimeter of your facility. That way you can get that natural daylight. But then for storage and medical spaces, typically, you want to keep them on the inner part of your facility. That way you can just use artificial light. Obviously for storage, you don't need natural light for that. For medical spaces, there is one exception. She said if you have your facility with north windows, it creates like an ethereal look. Those were her words. And it's actually really nice for the vets to have that. But if you can't do that, like never put a vet office east facing. Essentially, you never want to do that because then the sunlight will be directly in the vet or the vet tech's eyes. But on that note, the only thing that I got from that is that north lighting is beautiful and ethereal. So yeah, I think if we do this, I would want to put the dog spaces in the north lighting. Windows are very important. That's another note that I wrote down. I'm not sure I needed to do that because this whole page has been about lighting and windows, but I wrote it. And then for noise control, just because that's kind of everybody's number one concern, both in the shelter and out of the shelter, you don't want angry neighbors. So best practices, try to keep under 10 dogs per zone. And then you should always have, you know, it should be used as like isolation, but have a space of like 4 kennels. And then what you're gonna do when you don't have isolation dogs, you're gonna put all the barkers in their own space so that when they go crazy for no apparent reason, they're just instigating in their own little pod. And then everybody else can remain calm because they're not feeding into that craziness for no reason. We all know who those dogs are. All right, and then my last note for today, donations. Again, this is one that I probably wouldn't have thought of just because as of right now, we don't have a really big community base, and so we're not getting a ton of donations, if any, most days. So one thing when you do start a new facility is like, where are those donations going to go? Who's going to run it? What's the protocol? Because when you do open a new facility, you do get a lot of community interest and a lot of people wanting to be a part of the movement, and wanting to support in any way that they possibly can. So in that case, you really want to make sure that you have a plan in place, that you have storage for it, and that the community knows, like, do I need to come during business hours? Can I just drop it off in a shed somewhere? Like, how do I go about this? So just making sure that you have a plan for that as well. Good problems to have, I guess. But anyways, okay, that was it for day 1. Like I said, I hope to do these brain dumps every single night. Tomorrow, I think we have 2 roundtables and 3 sessions. Could be wrong, but I will check the schedule. But anyways, that's going to be a lot of information. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you found this informative. I certainly did. And I will see you tomorrow.